Hello and welcome to Tech Venture Podcast. I'm Janvi Agrawal, your host today, and we have a special guest joining us, Mr. Hans Mulder, an dynamic entrepreneur and IT expert, and he's a professor as well as an author of several books and articles on IT projects. But today, he has joined us to discuss IT project success and failures over the past 25 years. Before we dive into Tech Talk, let's get to know our guest in his own words. Can you just describe yourself?
Okay, welcome, and I'm honored to be a guest at your podcast. It all started many years ago when my dad started in 1963 in the IT industry. So actually, I'm a second generation IT professional. And doing that, I encountered two laws. The law of more, double O. You can do much more with IT each year. But also another law, the law of Murphy. When it can go wrong, it will go wrong. So that led to different occupations. So I'm a researcher trying to find out where it goes wrong. I'm also a lecturer and professor at the university to lecture students how they can succeed. But even then, I'm a negotiator, arbitrator, and a mediator in IT conflicts. So that's my background.
Okay, good to know you. So before we officially dive into the tech talk, I just want to introduce Tech more and myself. So, dear audience, I'm Janvi Agrawal, your host, and this episode is proudly brought to you by Tech, a pioneer technology solution provider dedicated to innovation and efficiency. Tech. So we are an IT platform with focus on IT solution, IT resources, recruitment, and tech audio podcast with partnership over 50 plus tech giants like SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, Pega, OutSystems, APN, Salesforce's Cloudera, Informatica, and many more. We specialize in services like ERP, app development, data and AI, ML blockchain, cloud managed services, UX and UI. We have a huge team of over 20,000 plus experts in various fields who can work either on-site and offshore and can be deployed within 24 hours. We are big on hearing from tech leaders, and today we are starting with Mr. Hans. So should we start with the Q&A?
Indeed, we should.
Okay. So can you just let me know, Hans, how do you manage your diverse profile roles as an entrepreneur, professor, and a chairman?
Right. Well, for me, it's all about balance. So I like to do different things. And also, I think it strengthens each other. So when I'm doing a court case, I can learn a lot of it. And I can pass it through to my students. So actually, it's also helping my other activities. I have a kind of iterative approach. I am an entrepreneur doing things. Sometimes you need to know why. And then I'm a researcher. And when I'm a little bit more understanding of the topic, I'm a lecturer. But even then, things can go wrong. I am an arbitrator, mediator, or expert of the courts. So for me, actually, it is more a way of iterating the learning curve in the IT industry.
So basically, all you want to say is learning and balance.
Learning and balance. That's a very good summary. Thank you for that. Yes, indeed.
Okay, good to know about it. So, and just let me know what motivated you to pursue PhD and become a professor.
Right. Well then, because the law of Murphy is always challenging us to do the best things in the industry, next to my companies, which I started in 1995, the first company, I was also conducting a PhD research at Delft University of Technology. And the topic of my research was about enterprise design, how to design the enterprise from the perspective of communication. Why? Because communication is a very good, translation towards IT. If you do understand how people communicate, you know which facts they're going to exchange, you know the processes. So for me, it was a necessity next to my companies to learn more about how is the connection between enterprise and IT. That was a long journey. It was a journey of about 10 years, but I succeeded to have performed more than 28 case studies, under which one was the development of an ISO standard for the civil construction industry, how to connect more than 80 parties within a platform based on a standardized approach of communication. So for me, the balance again here is that doing research is very much practical, actually. As Kurt Lydon has said, there's nothing as practical as good theory. So for me, that was the approach to, let's say, be more aware of the possibilities, but also, of course, of the risks of using IP. Right.
Okay. That was a great insight from your side, Hans. So can you just let me know what are the most common causes of conflicts in IT sector and how do you handle it?
Right. Well, that is a very interesting question indeed, because when I was asked by the courts to investigate, let's say, the IT conflicts, most of the time, of course, the customer said it is too late, too little, and too expensive. But the other side, of course, the supplier, the vendor, the partner who was delivering the software, said the opposite. There was no support from management. There was no support from the organization. They were not aware where they were and where they were going to. So it was a kind of, let's say, for me, a reason to research, to deep grounds why IT projects fail. So in that respect, in 1995, I had read an article which was from the Standish Group in Boston, and they called it the Chaos Report, 1994-1995. And for me, that was very interesting because it was about statistics. They had more than 5,600 case studies, and they said, well, it's about three things. It is about people, people, and people. They are the most common factors of success or factors of failure. So when diving into that, I was thinking, that's interesting. You can have let's say, research which is based on statistics, case studies, in which you can see which factors are helping and which factors are, well, let's say, causing problems. So for me, that was a start in the IT conflicts industry. It also started with the governments in Europe who were stating, please be aware that a court case is not always a solution. Most likely the project will terminate and then you have lost a lot of time and material. So for me, next to the research part, like an expert seeing what is right, what is wrong, we tried to get a more mediating approach, which was actually in 1989. So it was before mediation was really well known. So we flew to Boston, to the Harvard University, and there they were talking about negotiations. Negotiations about, for instance, the nuclear forces between Russia and the US. And they read books about it, about getting to how to negotiate towards a solution. So for me, it became more clear that there's not one way only to resolve conflicts. There are multiple ways to resolve conflicts. You can have a verdict. You can say, you're right, you're wrong, and this is what you have to do. But you can also try to figure out, together with the parties involved, how can we solve this problem? So actually, again, it was from practice, when I was reflecting on that, working on this topic, that's for me, the area of alternative dispute resolution became an eminent part of being an IT professional.
Okay, so basically it is all about making a negotiation outside the court.
Right.
Better resources that are available.
Right, indeed. If you can do that, then you can, of course, save time. You can save the relationship between the partners, the vendors, and the customer. Because a court case is not the best way to make friends. And it also puts your project on hold. So for me, it became clear that mediation was a really good approach of steering the relationships between the project. And of course, if you think that through, you could also say, why just use mediation at the end? Why there isn't conflict? How can you use mediation before you have a conflict? That would be great. So nowadays, when there is a big project, let's say a project of more than 50 million euros, or let's say about $45 million, the chances that you are in, let's say, a conflict are rather high. So why wait for things to go wrong? Why not already appoint from both parties a mediating IT professional who observes from a, let's say, independent perspective how the project goes and already helps and already detects early warnings. So when there is a conflict, the mediator is already there trying to resolve it. So for me, it became clear that because our industry is so complex, so much interesting things, but also very much risks, you should also pay attention to the human factor and try to set in place some, let's say, mechanisms to overcome, but also try to prevent the conflicts.
Okay, so Hans, it was very commendable to know like we can do things apart from the court case as well. Can you share an interesting case from your dispute settlement work?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. There was a case where there were two IT vendors. One was, let's say, the provider of the general ledger, the accounting system. And the other vendor was making specialized software for local governments, for cities. And together they had a good market share in Europe. But one of the parties decided not to continue the relationship and to choose for another accounting system. You could imagine that was a terrible loss, of course, for the partnership and the company who provided for the accounting system. So they said, well, if you are going to leave us alone and we don't have a contract anymore, we are not supporting the current customers, which of course led to a court case because all the customers were then in a risk that they couldn't work anymore with the software system. So the judge appointed a mediator, which was me, by the way. So how can you resolve this problem when two vendors which were successful working together are separating? Well, and now the customers of that collaboration are in risk that they cannot use the software anymore. So when we had a talk with the two vendors, it became clear to me that they should continue their work together because there were differences which were so huge. You couldn't force them to keep working together as a joint venture. But you should also not harm your customers because that is the worst thing you can do. So we figured out that if they both, when the contracts expired, each contract expires from the customers in different time schedules, then they both should offer a solution to the old customer. And if the old customer decided for one of them, that would of course be great. But even so, if the customers decided for a third party, there was no real risk. Now the thing is very interesting. If you have current customers and you continue it on maintenance, you get about a turnover of 15 to 20% a year. But if the customers have a choice to choose again for a new vendor or the existing two, that meant that you could deliver a new license, new training, new support, and your gains would be higher than 15 to 20%. So you could even lose a third to the old partnership partner and a third to the market. And would you retain 1/3 to yourself, you would still be better off. And the customers would be serviced to the end of their contract time and would have a choice to choose between the two or another. And now the beautiful thing comes that both the old partners gained about 45% of the market share. So actually everybody won. And I think that's a beautiful case that you can see that sometimes you have to think out of the box. You have to think, how can we make the pie even bigger? Well, most of the time we were in conflict. It is like hurting each other. It is like -1 is -3. But if you could really put in this kind of an example, it could be +3. So for me, that was a very interesting case about how you could settle conflicts in IT and even involve the interests of the customers.
Okay, thank you, Hans, for sharing the story with us. It was quite impressive how did you handle the case.
Right.
From your experience of arbitration, mediation, and expert reports, how do you resolve these conflicts?
Right. Well, this is a very interesting question, because the former example was a mediation case. But of course, you could not mediate everything. There are things which are very difficult. So sometimes the parties who are having a conflict are already working somewhere else. So they are replaced by lawyers. So the lawyers are actually the ones who have been delegated to resolve the conflict. But they are not employees of both companies. And they are not IT professionals as well. And actually, the case is already terminated. So there is little things to do in the future. As in the former example, you could make arrangements for the future. So how to handle that if the case is so expensive, not anymore able to change the current situation in practice, and is led by lawyer firms who have to resolve it? Well, for me, that was very interesting to see that arbitration is a way of having expert opinion within the jury. As I told you before, I'm an IT professional, but also have studied law for 1.5 years to know how law and courts are connected to the IT. And when we have arbitration, we have always an odd number, so an arbitrator or 3, or in exceptional cases 5 arbitrators, but most likely it would be 3 arbitrators. I would be one of the arbitrators. So I get all the, let's say, the productions, all the material about the case, and then I'm going to have a discussion with the other 2 arbitrators about how, from an IT perspective, the problem was caused, if their claims are, let's say, trustworthy or correct, and how we could settle this with a verdict. And for me, that was also very interesting to see that arbitration could also be a good solution for both parties if they are not, again, able to restore the relationship. So my experience as an arbitrator is that the law can be a very professional tool to end conflicts and resolve those. And another thing was that I wasn't aware that before I started this, is that arbitration is an international way of settling conflicts. So if you would have a conflict between different countries, let's take an example, a country in Europe and Brazil, the verdict of a local court wouldn't really be helpful, because in Brazil they would say, you do not recognize this verdict. So then you have to start over your court case in Brazil. But if you are using arbitration, many countries in the world are connected to the arbitration. And that meant that if you have a verdict from arbitration, the local judges in Brazil would say, this is okay. You can use this verdict to settle the conflict. So for me, it was also very interesting to see that next to the fact that you have an expert arbitrator within the jury, which is not the case if you have normal court cases, you also have the international way of executing the verdict. And it goes very fast because you're not limited to the times which are needed for the governmental courts. So, yes, I would say that my experiences as an arbitrator at the Netherlands Arbitration Institute are very positive, because I think it is business-oriented. The reason why it started in the Netherlands just after the Second World War was that we have a huge harbor in the Netherlands, which is Rotterdam, which is connecting all the countries in Europe towards the Atlantic Ocean. And of course, there are many transactions going on in the harbor. So when you would resolve that through the governmental courts, it would take too much time. And by the way, judges are not always aware of the content of the conflict. So for me, the expertise of arbitration, the swiftness, but also the international aspects, were very positive experiences to encounter.
Okay, that's nice. I just got to know the insights like on how arbitration works.
Indeed. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, for me, it was also a very nice experience because, as I mentioned before, I'm actually an IT professional. But I think now that if you have a company, you should also be aware of the, let's say, the mechanics of the laws. Because it is not just a burden to have a contract before you can start. The contract actually should be a live, living document which could be helpful to be successful with your case. And so for me, it became much more interesting to see how can I use the law to be successful rather than, well, you need to have a contract and when it goes wrong, then we're going to read the contract. Most of the time when I ask people, do you know the contract? Who really read it? Not as few who've done it, but I think that should be done because it is a way of resolving probably the most filial projects. So yeah, it's an interesting experience as an IT expert.
Okay, but to come to a conclusion, you will have to do some research from your side as well, right?
Right, indeed. Yes, indeed.
So what are the key topics on how do you do the research?
Right. Well, it started, which I mentioned before, by what is a good approach to measure IT projects. So when I had written the article of the Standards Group, the Chaos Reports, I was collaborating with the Standards Report more than 25 years now. And what we do is we not only ask for questionnaires, but we also have small interviews with the people who are sending in their cases. So, for instance, somebody sends in a case study on an IT project, and they state this is a very successful project. And then we're going to call. We're going to call towards the financial director, and we're going to ask the financial director, can you tell a little bit more about this successful project? Yes, indeed. We were within budget. Okay, thank you very much. Then we're going to call the IT director. We're going to ask, how did the project go? Well, very successful. We were on target. We delivered all functionality. Okay, thank you very much. And then we're going to call some of the employees, some of the users. And they say, well, we don't use the program. By the way, nobody uses the program. And for me, that was very interesting to see that although on paper it could be a successful project, it was not being used. So for us, it meant that it is not a successful project. And in that respect, we've learned more and more and more. Like, for instance, most of the projects now are being called agile. But when we took the phone and we called towards the organizations, they said, well, we are agile, but we don't implement. We only implement after a couple of years when everything is finished. But it's not agile, of course. So we had to define a new rubric in our database of our research, and we call it I know, agile in name only. So we figured out many things by doing the market research around the world. And that is what the Standards Report is about. But if you have such a huge database of more than 100,000 case studies, you can also a little bit predict if you start your own IT project. Because when you have the same dimensions, you can pick out of this database projects which are lookalike, but we already have been finished. We call that the nearest neighbor algorithm. So we have a look at the database and see how does this match towards your project. Well, the chances on success are only 12%. Well, perhaps you should change your approach. So you can also use this knowledge of past projects from other parties to have a benchmark on your own projects. And then we went a little bit deeper. When we had discussion about it, we said, but what are the reasons why they are successful? And there are, of course, hundreds of factors. But we tried to narrow it down to 3 categories. It is the good team. As you might know, a good IT team is very important. You can better have 5 excellent team members than 50 average. And then another thing is what we see is that a good place. not just the team who is producing the results, it's the organization that should adopt the results. And some organizations are better and faster than others to adapt the changes. And the third category is the good sponsor, which is not the project leader, but the good sponsor is the one who actually connects the organization, the good place, and the good team to adopt the current way of working to a new way of working. So more business-oriented, you could say. And that is the most important independent factor of success, is the good sponsor. So one person could make a big difference in success or failure of projects. And that is very interesting to see. So for me, this research, which we now ended after 25 years, has led to a new research. Namely, we are very much aware of the contributions of former methodologies of IT development, like waterfall, which had good aspects like go, no-goes. We are very much fond on agile ways of working. But we also see that from the perspective of the good sponsor and the good team and the good place, you could also more recognize the current good place. So you could also focus not only on project-based changes, but also changes within the organization, within the good place. So we call that infinite flow, because a project, by definition, should be finite, but the organization, by definition, should be continuous. So from this research we call infinite flow, we learn a lot of things. And again, here it is about case studies, and it's about research and interviews. And around the world, more organizations are interested in flow. To give you a more broader example, when we are looking, for instance, at ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning Software, all the time we would think about the implementation of the system into the new good place. But actually, I think that's only the beginning. If you do have your enterprise resource planning software in place, then you can continuously make more benefit of your enterprise resource planning software. And that second part, that could be done in connection to the people working in the good place. So infinite flow.
Okay, so in conclusion, it is all about the infinite flow, and you should have the sources that you require to do the research, right?
Right. Well, this is the thing when it is very helpful that there's a balance. So I'm connected towards 3 universities. So there are many students. So I can give many, let's say, assignments to work things out. Next to that, of course, within the network of research companies, we also have the possibilities to discuss and to connect. And during the weeks, I give many lectures, which all give me responses towards how it works. I'm also writing books, and the books have to be published, so they are being edited, there are being reviews on that. So actually, it is also like iterative and continuous. So this movement about flow is not just limited to my days at the university, but also in practice, because it is a way of researching actually how things are done.
Okay, that's quite interesting on how you use all your resources.
Right, indeed.
Okay, so I just got an insight. Like, you have been an arbitrator with Netherlands Arbitrage Institute.
Right.
Can you share your experience there?
Yeah, well, for instance, as I said before, arbitration is also international. So when there's a contract which is being signed by 2 parties or more, and they decide that the Arbitration Institute, the Netherlands Arbitration Institute, is the organization to resolve a conflict, then it comes to our organization. So I had a nice case between a Russian bank and a provider for the software from the US, which has been settled in Europe. So that is a very interesting case. And of course, there was a translation of all the documents from Russian into English, because my Russian is not that good, of course. But we saw that in this arbitration, again, by asking the right questions, it became much clearer from both the parties what was the real reason why it didn't work. So although there is a verdict, sometimes parties can be very helped by giving them a verdict, which also includes a expert opinion of the reasons why and how you could do it better in the future. And that also gives them a kind of report which they can bring back to their own organizations, which gives much more understanding of how this happened. So that is an example, one of the experiences I had at the Nederlands Arbitration Institute. But during the 1990s, because I'm connected to this organization for a long time, we have seen that also mediation could be helpful. So after many years, they also introduced mediation. By the way, this institute is also having an anniversary this year because they are existing for more than 75 years now. So it is also interesting to see that this is not just a new thing, arbitration, but for us, it is already there for more than 75 years.
Okay, so it's been there from, you can say, almost a century now.
Almost, yeah. I think that the idea of arbitration, which is actually a kind of private law institute, is something which is very much modern time, because things are changing so fast. You would like to have a verdict as fast as possible. And I can give you another example. I was not the arbitrator because I'm really focusing on IT, but there are, of course, many different kinds of conflicts. So there was a conflict about a certain sailing race in the Mediterranean. And it had to be decided, could this team join this race, whether or not? And if you would have gone to the courts, it would have taken you a long time. But the Arbitration Institute took the, the case, and within a weekend of 2 days, they came at the verdict. So that is very fast. And if you imagine, if you are in the IT and you have to wait for months for a certain verdict, you rather have arbitration if it can be done in a couple of days.
So what helps you to stay updated, Hans?
Yeah.
How do you update yourself? As we have been in the industry from past 25 years and we have talked so much about the different cases.
Right.
So each case is very different. How do you stay updated with these latest IT?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Yeah. It's a very good question you're stating. Of course, I'm also still doing education myself, which is part of all the registers I'm in. So there is a register for arbitrators. There's a register for court experts. There's a register for mediators. I am in almost 7 registers. So it means that each year I have to provide evidence that I'm still up to date. So I'm going also to follow, lectures. I'm going to follow trainings, workshops. For instance, to make it much more concrete, last week there was a change in the Dutch law about how to have claim handling, the process law. So I have been in a university for 1 day being lectured by professors of law. Actually, there were judges, and we had to prepare ourselves and read the law, ask questions. So that is one thing of having an update for myself, which is very formal because I need to abide to the registers and what we call permanent education. You have to have points, credits for that. So that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, my curiosity, my interest in the things. So, for instance, when I'm very much interested in the topic of AI, artificial intelligence, and also the risk of bias and debiasing what it is, I find 2, of course, brilliant, talented students, and I ask them, please write your master thesis about the AI trias politica. And they said, what is it? Well, I don't know either, but I think that we have AI to execute. We have AI to do the real-time check and controls, but that should be a different language model, of course, otherwise you cannot check the formal one. And if there are any differences between the two, you should have a responsible professional making the choice. So that would be the triad. And now I'm already working more than a half a year on this topic of AI and trias politica, reading all kinds of paper, having interviews, looking into software and tooling. So that is the way I'm doing it. It is a way of formal education, but also it is part of the learning curve. As you just really made a good summary, it's about learning and balance.
Yeah, I just like the growth mindset that you have in you.
Right.
So it's all about learning and balancing and implementing it as well.
Well, that's the thing, you have to do it. So the other thing what Kurt Lewin said, it's not only about the formal theories, which are very practical, but it is also about doing things. If you really want to understand how things work, just do it, because that is the most complex part of learning, not just reading the books, it's doing it in practice. So for me, I try to balance that as well. So part of it, of course, is formal education, but most of the time I'm just working in practice, reflecting on what I'm doing. You could call it a reflective practitioner.
Like there are many youngsters out there, Hans, who wants to implement, but they fears getting feel in it. So what is your advice to them?
My advice is do as many things as possible, because that is a good way of being successful. If you do one thing only, you have to be successful 100% on that first thing. But if you do more things, then you can have super results as well. So I would really encourage the youngsters to do as many things as possible. And then you also, by doing that, can see where are your talents, where is your passion, what do you really like. And because you do so many things on one day, sometimes I come home and my wife asked me, how was your day? I said, beautiful, really enjoyed it. Oh no, sorry, by the way, I had a rough morning. But because you do so many things, it doesn't look like working. So I would really encourage the youngsters to do as many different things as possible to see where their talents are. And in the past, you should have a really clear scope and focus. But the world is changing so fast that you cannot predict the future anymore. So it's much better to be very ambidextrous, which means that you can do as many things as possible, that you are talented in more than one area only. I would say that is for youngsters something which they really can do. They are multitasking. They are so energetic. So I would really urge them and motivate them to figure out, discover and practice what they can do, and to connect the dots, as Steve Jobs once said.
Okay, so basically it is all about trying.
Indeed, like Master Yoda says, don't try, just do.
Okay. So, Hans, it was great having you here.
Same for me. It was very interesting to have this conversation. So, looking forward to the next ones.
Okay, definitely. I will contact you for the next. Okay, thank you for sharing your experience and expertise with us today for this enlightening conversation, as well as you are a very inspiring personality as well.
Thank you very much, and see you next time.
Okay, so Hans, I'd even like to thank our audience who would be listening to us. I hope they had a great time diving into the world of technology and law with you. So before we end the podcast today, do you want to say something to the audience?
Yeah, please. If you are very much interested in the topics like alternative dispute resolution or about IT projects or on flow, infinite flow, please contact me on LinkedIn, which is very easy to find because it is about Hans Mulder, enterprise researcher, lecturer, and negotiator. So please contact me if you have any questions about these topics.
Okay.